Welcome to Desert Wanderers. If you're new here, we bridge the gap between you and the person in the pew next to you. Today we have a special host, Father Cintra. He will be doing his Generational Catholicism series. This plays on the third week of every month and will be a new segment for our show on Desert Wanderers. We're so excited to bring this to you. Let's jump right into it.
Hello, everyone. We have something a little different for you this month. Last month, in the month of June, I went on the Morning Light Show on Salt and Light Radio with Hope and Brian, and we did a teaching series basically summarizing the discussions that we've had so far with the Big Dodges, the Little Dodges, the Dysons, and the Flanagans here on this Generational Catholicism segment. Brian and Hope had great questions and thoughts and insights, and so we thought that for this month, we would just smash those four small segments together into one episode and release it to you here on the podcast. I pray this is helpful for you. If you have any feedback for us, please do send it our way. And we'll be back next month with a fresh conversation with one of the couples or a couple of the couples, and we'll continue exploring what maybe it looks like to raise kids in a way that best fosters the transmission of the Catholic faith from one generation to the next within the home.
We're going to be talking about generational Catholicism. What does that even mean?
Well, that's a good question. That's what we're trying to find out. I think we see ourselves as kind of explorers trying to find out this question. What is generational Catholicism? In other words, what is a version, or not a version, but what are principles and habits and priorities of Catholicism lived at home that facilitates the transmission of the faith from parents to children? And so I'm working with four couples who have done this and or are doing this, and we're trying to find that out.
So where should we start with this?
Well, there is a project, of course, the Desert Wanderers podcast. That's Natalie Laers podcast of Sunlight Radio. So we have a monthly segment, and the most recent one Natalie was on, and that was really fun. And the monthly segment, we're looking at different things, trying to find some common ground. But one way to start is by recognizing this sad statistic, the sobering statistic, that only 15% of children raised in Catholic households grow up to be faithful Catholic as adults. And this is from an article that was in the ICR several months ago called Raising Catholic Kids, What Successful Parents Have in Common. So that's really sobering, and we want to take that seriously, and we want to pray for those children who have left the faith, and we want to pray for them to return. Also pray for the parents and the grandparents who are really grieving this reality. And so that's one thing we're trying to look into, right? What is going on there? Now, at the same time, as I went through seminary and as I've now been beginning my priestly life and my priestly ministry, I've met many families who had 2 children, 4 children, 5 children, 8 children, 9 children, who, all of those children, 100% of them have grown up to live as practicing Catholics as adults. So that raises the question, because these families raise their kids in the same parishes, in the same time period, in the same culture, in the same everything, except, well, this is the hypothesis, except what was going on at home. They were doing things differently at home. They were saying yes to certain things that other families weren't, and they were saying no to certain things that other families weren't. And I'll give some caveats to that, but that's kind of our approach. So what were those families feeding their kids for breakfast every morning?
Yeah. I'm sure it was Quaker oatmeal, right? But
That's right.
Hope and I, we're kind of in this, what they call sandwich generation, where we're not only raising kids, but we're maybe taking care of elderly parents as well. And you're even seeing this, I think, in our architecture, where some of these new homes are being built with mother-in-law quarters because the families are starting to come back together. And it's like, not only do we have kids going to high school, but we've also got, grandma who's 86 years old living with us as well. Would that situation maybe help when you're all together? You've got 3 generations of Catholics living under the same roof, that maybe what grandma experienced would trickle down to the grandkids.
I suppose it could. I certainly could see that it could, and I could see there being some obstacles there as well. It'd probably depend on each family. We'll call them the big Dodges. So there are two Dodge couples with us, with the big Dodges and the little Dodges. So the big Dodges are Ken and Teresa, and they raised 5 children. All 5 of them are practicing the faith. One of their children, their only son, Kenny, he is married now and raising children. They just had their 4th baby just a couple of days ago. And so they're the little Dodges. And the Ken and Teresa, they talk about how, so the big Dodges, they talked about how they're also helping out their parents who are now grandparents. And they've talked a little bit about those dynamics. But I think this is one principle here that we're discovering that was in the Idaho Catholic Register article, and we're finding this in all of these families, is the importance of having a warm and affectionate home. A warm and affectionate home. It's the first indispensable building block. If that's in place, then other things will have to be layered onto it, right? Proper boundaries and proper discipline and rosaries and masses and developing a prayer life and getting to know the Lord in a personal way, growing in virtue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are lots of things. But if that warm and affectionate home is not in place, then there won't be that fertile soil that all those other things will require in order to develop those roots. And so maybe that's one thing to consider as far as grandparents. And, is there a warm and affectionate home in the home?
That's such an interesting point, because you hear that a lot about, I'm going to grandma's house because I can relax. Or grandma will feed me whatever I want. And also grandma will listen to whatever woes I have, because not being the parent, grandma can maybe give some advice or some insights that maybe mom or dad aren't ready to give. What does it mean to have a warm and affectionate home?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on the role of the grandparents, that's something we've touched on with Ken and Teresa too, is that they see themselves not as a second set of parents, but really the grandparents, and if anything, there to support the parents. So it's important to not have any tension, right, between parents and grandparents, it's really the parents' responsibility to raise the children and guide them in the direction that they're hoping to guide them in. Sometimes there's some tension between grandparents and parents, and that kind of chips away at that warm and affectionate home. But what is a warm and affectionate home? That'd be hard. I'm not sure exactly. It's not like no family is perfect, right? No family is perfect. That's one of the caveats for sure. And even in regards to children who have left the faith, we've talked about how you can have Mary and Joseph, the perfect parents, doing everything perfectly, never sinning, doing everything just right, and Mary and Joseph's children, let's say, that's not Jesus, but let's say Mary and Joseph's children, they're going to have free will, and they're going to go on and make their own decision as adults. And so first, for parents listening to this who think, I did everything I could. First of all, maybe you did do everything you could, and your children still chose to walk away, and that is a decision that they make as a consequence of us having free will. And the opposite is also true. Parents can do nothing right, and that's an exaggeration for us. Nobody does nothing right, but as a hyperbole, parents can do nothing right, and all of their children can go on and choose to live as practicing Catholics. And so we're not looking to induce any shame on anyone, right, who maybe have children who have walked away. This is, first of all, for parents who are raising kids themselves and are seeking to learn some wisdom, some advice from other parents who are doing the same. And the episode with Natalie was wonderful, as she is in that position, and she was asking questions to Jake and Lindsay Dyson, another one of the couples. And so we're not looking to induce shame or anyone, but then also, is there something in our hearts? If I raised kids, let's say, and all of my kids left the faith, maybe there was something that I was doing or not doing that influenced that. And if I become really defensive about that, maybe I'm not seeing that there's some part of my heart that the Lord still wants to redeem. And so if I can just lower my defenses and let the Lord into that fortress in my heart, maybe he can heal that. And maybe my children won't be any different because they're now grown, they're adults, maybe they're not going to change their mind. but I can be healed, and I can maybe develop a deeper relationship with God, and maybe with them too, with the children and grandchildren. But as a circuitous way to get into your question, but one aspect of a warm and affectionate home is a home where children, first of all, they feel seen, they feel known, they feel loved. These are indispensable, right? A child who's grown up feeling seen and known and loved. If that's in place, then there's more to talk about, of course. But if the child is feeling like they're lost, they're misunderstood constantly, they're not affirmed, they're not encouraged, they're not loved, they're probably going to seek consolation and communion elsewhere. First of all, in other peers, and then if the parents really talked about God, but then the parents didn't transmit that love and affection to their children, then they're going to think, well, maybe God is not the place where I can feel seen and known and loved.
What do you tell parents when their children go off and become Augustine? How can we remain that Saint Monica and just continue to pray that, yes, they will eventually find their way back after they're done exercising their free will, that maybe they use that to come back home to the Catholic Church?
That's obviously what we want to pray for, right? That we want to be praying for everybody to come back home. I firmly believe that God wants everybody to be in communion with Him, to be in communion with the sacraments, to be in communion with His church, and therefore, and consequently, subsequently, to go to heaven and be with God, be with Him for all of eternity. I certainly believe that that's true. At the same time, I think it's important to recognize that we don't have control over other people. And this is true for parents. I mean, this is hard for me because I want all of my parishioners to do everything I say, everything I want them to do. No, I'm just kidding.
They're nodding.
Yeah. But I do want all my parishioners to be in communion with God. And many of them won't. I mean, there are many people in Idaho Falls that are not in communion with God. And so it's a hard reality for me to accept that, to surrender control of that. And this, I think, is an important lens for to see the story of Saint Monica, because we oftentimes put priority on the fact that Augustine returned home. And praise God for that. And that's wonderful. St. Augustine is one of my patrons, and our Pope now is, of course, a son of St. Augustine. And for us, lots of other reasons, it's a wonderful thing that St. Augustine returned home. But I don't think that's the primary point of that story. The primary point of that story is the fact that Monica remained faithful to God no matter what. No matter how Patrick was abusive towards her, no matter how far away Augustine wandered from God and from the church, Monica remained faithful. She prayed, she grew in virtue, she developed a relationship with God each and every day. And Monica, by doing this, would have become a saint, independent of whether Augustine returned home or not. She would be with God in heaven, in communion with God for all of eternity, whether Augustine had returned home or not. And we might never have heard of her, because we know of her mostly because of St. Augustine, but she would still be in God. She still would be in heaven with God nonetheless.
Question is this. In your conversation with different families and different parents, did it matter how wealthy a family was, how many toys they had, how big their house was, what their occupations were? Did that play a role at all?
We haven't talked much about social or economic demographics. We have talked about a couple of other things that are other examples of your question. One being the size of the family. So one had one of two, and the other is one of nine, and 2 for 2 stayed at home, 9 for 9 stayed at home. Now we're going to talk about being open to life. We haven't gotten to that yet, but we'll see how important that is. But families are limited, even though they're open to life. There are different circumstances that limits them. So it's not like a large family is necessarily, an indispensable piece of the puzzle. But being open to life, being open to God, I think it is. We think it is. Another example was liturgy. One grew up in the traditional Latin Mass and has shared some benefits and some cons to that. and another grew up in a charismatic movement, and they've talked about some of the pros and some of the struggles in that. And there's another example too that we've talked about that's not coming to mind right now, but we think, schooling, whether it's Catholic school, public school, homeschool, and we want to we want to do an episode just on that. We haven't done that yet, but there is a broad range there. But what we're wanting to highlight through all of these things is that it's not first. Well, what we are exploring is not what happens at school, what happens at church, what happens in the playground, out in the community park or what have you, but rather what happens at home. Right, that's our focus, because most of the time is lived at home. Right, sometimes as a priest, and this last thing I'll say to this question here. I know we're probably running out of time, but a lot of times as a priest, I want to focus on the parish. Like, I want to improve the life of the parish, and so I want to improve the liturgy. I want to improve communication. I want to improve sacramental preparation, and all that stuff is important. And especially once I become a pastor, one day that will be within my duties to really focus on. But parishioners coming to church, they're only spending 1 hour, 2 hours, maybe 4 hours at most 4 hours a week in church. The remainder of that time, whatever 24 times 7 minus 4 is at home, right? Or the majority of that is at home. Some of that is also in the grocery store, but the majority of that is at home. And so that, the kids growing up, that's what's the daily habits at home are going to be way more influential on the human, the spiritual, the intellectual formation of that child than what's going on at church.
Excellent.
At least that's my hypothesis. And if we can improve that, then we'll improve the life of the parish. Because I mentioned that Dr. Greg Popchak in his article, Raising Catholic Kids, What Successful Parents Have in Common, he mentioned that this is an indispensable building block. He says, the children who grew up in a warm and affectionate home, spending time with their family in fun, in prayer, and service to others, are more likely to remain Catholic as adults. And of course, there's a lot more to it, that what it takes to raise kids who then choose the Catholic faith as adults. But it does seem like if the home is not warm and affectionate, then the religion that the parents are trying to pass on to their children is not going to be well received, and that can actually breed some resentment both towards the parents and towards the religion, and of course towards God. So then Hope asked, what is it? What is a warm and affectionate home? And that question kind of stuck with me this last week. I've been thinking, so what can we talk more about that? What does it look like? What does it mean? And I jotted down some notes based on my observations of these families, these 4 families that we're doing this project with, and then also our conversations that we've been having on our podcast. But the first piece, I think, to this puzzle is warmth between parents, right? So before we start talking about what the parents are doing towards their children and with their children, the fact that the mom and dad are warm towards each other, they admire, they reverence each other. In conversation, they don't cut each other off. I mean, nobody does any of these things perfectly, right? So it's not about that, but routinely speaking, they're not cutting each other off. They're not talking over each other. They're not trying to win battles and arguments against each other. And not just not in front of their children. I mean, certainly not in front of their children, but just in general, what is their disposition towards each other? One thing I noticed in speaking with John and Heidi Flanagan, another couple, they're good friends of mine, we've been having these conversations over Zoom. They live in Minnesota, and I noticed that when even though they're standing or sitting next to each other, and when I'm talking, they're both looking at me, looking at the camera. But let's say when John starts to talk, Heidi almost turns 90 degrees to face John, and now she's looking at him, she's gazing at him, she has a smile on her face, and she's listening to him. And then John would just do it in the same way. When Heidi would start speaking, John would turn to her and start speaking that way. And I'm not suggesting that couples who don't do that don't reverence each other, but for me, it was just such a great visual. And I don't know if they were even realizing that they were doing this. They were just so attentive and so in such admiration for what each other had to say. And then things like that we hear about date nights and parents of young kids. I think they probably usually roll their eyes at this. Like, there's no way we can do date nights, and certainly not on a weekly basis. And John and Heidi talked about how this gets easier later in life. So to just recognize the season, so that's an important thing. But the priority of the relationship of the parents, right? They're in relationship with each other, and they're not just on a mission to raise their kids. They've got married because of each other, because they want to know each other, to love each other, to serve each other, to reverence each other throughout their lives. And so to keep feeding that fire throughout their life, I think is maybe the first piece towards building this warm and affectionate home.
We hear people talk about marriage and family in that order, but we see culturally it's often family and marriage. How can parents maybe back each other up a little bit more?
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective of how the terms, right, marriage and family and family and marriage. And I think this happens too in the priesthood, or at least it certainly can, in the sense of relationship, identity, mission, right? This triad that I've really benefited from, that I learned from the Institute for Priestly Formation, which is that the focus of our Christian life is to have a relationship with God and develop that with the Father. Then we receive our identity of being His sons and daughters. Then we're sent on mission. But oftentimes we get the reverse. We think we have to focus on mission in order to earn our relationship. So I can see that playing out in the lives of families where, okay, but now our mission is to raise the family and to cultivate the family. And so let's focus on that. And if we do that right, then we'll have a good marriage. Whereas that's backwards, right? Let's nourish the marriage. Let's nurture the marriage. And then this, as a fruit, will grow a family, a healthy family, a harmonious family, and so forth. And how can parents back each other up in this direction? Again, John and Heidi, they talked about this image of the dad being the fence around the perimeter. And so if the dad is stable, is firm, is consistent, has followed through. Ken Sr. talked a lot about having followed through and how important that is, because that provides some predictability for the kids. The kids know that things are going to happen the way that the parents say that it will. And even if it's difficult, right, you say you're going to do something, but then you don't want to do that because you don't want to take away a fun activity or something, but just to be able to follow through with that. So the dad to be that fence, the perimeter, who's firm, that actually provides stability, and the kids are then free to play and to grow and develop. And then the mom being the heart of the household, the heart of the family. And Ken talked a lot about how he worked as a police officer and had lots of difficult situations at work, but then he would come home and know that he had a safe haven to come home to, that his wife Teresa worked very hard to provide for him and for their children. And so they would complement each other in that way. And John even says that Heidi would have the kids ready at the door, both when leaving and when coming home. So when leaving, the kids would all be at the home to wait to say goodbye to dad as dad went off to work. And actually, I've been with him for many of these occasions where the kids actually run to the window and be waving at him as he's driving down the driveway and driving out. And then coming home, same thing. They would run to the door and greet him at the door. And maybe some kids kind of do that naturally, but over time, especially as the kids, and they have 7 kids, and the teenagers continue to do this, and that's because the mom is being very intentional about providing that. And another little anecdote from John is that he would never let their kids disrespect them, and the kids love their parents, but sometimes kids get rowdy, as we know, but he would say, nobody disrespects your mother, especially not me, and certainly not you. And so he would be very firm about that. No, you're not going to disrespect your mother. You say, yes, mom. And then also the mom does this, say, yes, dad. And so the two were backing each other up in how it is that they're relating to each other and to their kids.
Absolutely.
But what about the parents to the kids? What are some ways that we can maybe celebrate our children and make them feel that warmth and affection?
Yes, and for anybody just jumping in, I'm certainly no parent expert. I'm not pretending to be. What it is that I'm coming from is where I'm having these conversations with these four couples, the oldest of whom have raised 5 kids, all 5 of whom are practicing the Catholic faith as adults. One of those is now raising his kids, and then there are a couple of other families that are doing this, and everybody's trying to share and trying to explore and discover what is it that facilitates the transmission of the Catholic faith from parents to children within the home. And in this context of developing a warm and affectionate home, the importance of celebrating the kids, right? Really nurturing and highlighting them and affirming them. And I think on a daily basis, it seems to be really important, to when kids want to say, and again, nobody does this perfectly. It's not about that. And we all have our shortcomings, but to be able to move in that direction of, I see you, I know you, I hear you wanting to say something. I want to I want to learn from you. John talks about how every night at dinner, he would get home and, they play a little bit, and then they would pray before dinner. They'd sit down for a meal. And then after everybody got settled, they would go around the table, and everybody would have a few minutes to share what happened in their day. And they would tell Dad, Dad, here's what I did. Here, I got hurt, and here's what happened, and here's what I did with my schoolwork. And he would just listen and ask questions and affirm them and be really attentive. And to me, when I was hearing him share that anecdote and paint that picture, the thought that what came to me was, well, he's teaching them how to pray. He's doing more than that. But one fruit of this is these kids are learning to pray because they're learning how to relate their hearts to their Father. That's going to be more impactful on how they develop a prayer life than, let me make sure you know how to say the Hail Marys and move the beads. I'm not mocking that at all, right? We should pray the rosary every day. But the rosary, if it doesn't have that relational aspect to it, then it just becomes rote, and it doesn't have the heart in it, which is then not going to sustain the growth of the faith over a long time. And so to be intentional about, okay, I'm going to honor you, I'm going to celebrate you, I'm going to pay attention to you. And then, of course, some baptism days and birthdays and so forth. And I have 2 quick anecdotes on this too in regards to putting kids to bed. Both John and Kenny shared little examples of what they do when they put their kids to bed. Kenny has shared that one of his sons can be pretty stubborn, can be pretty difficult oftentimes during the day. And so days can often, be difficult with a lot of disciplining and a lot of correction. And they try to be firm, but they try to be loving as they do that. But then he makes sure every night as he's putting him to bed, he says, Xavier, he hugs him really tight. He pulls him in and says, I love you. You are such a good boy. I can't wait to see you and to spend time with you tomorrow. And he just says that he's intentional about just pouring every love, all the love that he has for him, of displaying that and expressing that to him as he's putting him to bed, because that's how he wants his son to go to bed. He doesn't want his son to go to bed thinking, oh, I'm such a troublemaker. Oh, my dad and my mom are so disappointed in me. No, he wants him to think I'm loved. I'm loved by my father and by my mother. And John talked about this, and when he shared this, we all thought, okay, we kind of arrived at the answer of what it means to raise Catholic kids, because he said this. He said, when he puts his kids to bed, each one at a time, he says, do I love you? And of course they say yes. Then he says, is there anything you can do to make me love you more? And they say no. And then he says, is there anything you can do to make me love you less? And they say no. And he says, why do I love you? And they say, because I'm your son, or because I'm your daughter. Every night, and maybe they miss some nights here and there, but every night putting them to bed like this. And then he went to drop their oldest son off in seminary. He switched the questions to, does God love you? Oh. Yes. Is there anything you can do to make God love you more? No. Is there anything you can do to make God love you less? No. Why does God love you? Because I'm his son. this happened as he was dropping him off at the seminary. And Dad said, okay, you're you're free. You're ready to go to seminary and move out of the house and go off in your life.
It's beautiful.
Yeah,
And I don't think
absolutely.
we as parents realize just how powerfully that we can impact that. So it's summer, and we see lots of social media posts of parents exasperated because their kids have been out of school, a week now? They're like, when do they go back to school? And as a homeschool parent, I'm like, well, it's just a little different than what we had before. But to realize that that attitude of, I need a break from my kids, and that's why I send them to school, versus I want to be with them. When you homeschool, you hear a lot when your kids are little, you're really going to love your kids when they get older. And they're such a disaster when they're small, and you think there is no way that's going to work. And by golly,
Yeah.
they are interesting people. My kids are all going to leave this week to go camping with Dad, and I will miss them because they're just really funny, interesting people. I mean, they're a disaster like their mom, but they are still just great, and I will miss that.
Hey, really quick, I just wanted to say that 71% of you that listen to our content regularly have yet to subscribe to our channel. If you're enjoying this piece of content, go ahead and click right now. It's a free and easy way for us to continue to bring the guests you want to hear and the conversations that you want to have. That being said, it's also a good way to help engage with us and have feedback so we know what type of content you want to hear and making sure that every episode is worth your time. Thank you so much if you have already subscribed, and if you haven't, go ahead and click the button down below.
Here is maybe something where it can be easy or easier to find ourselves in when we're really committed to Catholicism, because we have high expectations, the highest expectations, right? We want to become saints. We want children to become saints. We want parishioners to become saints. So we have high expectations for ourselves and for everyone else. But here's the problem. If we have high expectations with low affection, that tends to breed resentment. And if we're honest, how often have we seen that? So then the right ingredients, so to speak, and again, with all the caveats aside from the first day, high affection and high expectation. We need those things. Both of these things need to be exalted to the summit. And maybe I would even qualify the high affection has to be prioritized, because we're going to have high expectation already. That's going to be more natural, so to speak. But high affection is something we have to be very intentional about, and that produces, according to John and Heidi, relationship and holiness. Relationship and holiness. So that's their little formula.
Excellent. Well, this week's session, what we wanted to talk about is this connection between the dinner table and Sunday Mass. And I know we've talked about it during pledge drives that, poor father only gets maybe 10 minutes at the ambo on Sunday, and that might not be enough to cultivate that rich Catholic soil in our lives. Where else are we going to get it? So we kind of have to continue that after Mass, and the best place to do it as a family is at the dinner table.
Right. So John and Heidi, again, and I'll talk about Jake and Lindsay here too, because they're very intentional about this as well. The big Dodges and the little Dodges as well, but I've talked about this with the Flanagans and the Dysons a little more, that they've both made the decision to not have a television. John and Heidi did so actually before they got married, during their courtship phase. And they put it like this. They said, our family it's not going to be about being entertained. It's going to be about being in relationship. So even before they got married, they had this decision, and they do that. They sing songs together regularly. They play games. They run around the backyard. They read stories. They go on adventures. And when it comes to the dinner table, they do this every night. John gets home from work, and they sit down, and they share. They go around the table sharing how their days were, and I think that's such a great primer for prayer. Right, with each child telling their father how their day was, the highs and the lows, really just relating their heart to their father. And that's going to be that bridge that's then going to produce a relationship with God the Father. Is going to flow into that relationship. And the Dysons, we had a whole episode on this and talking about how they've structured their dinner table, and we can talk about that a little bit, but more broadly, what the connections are between the daily ritual It's really a ritual, right? The daily ritual of a family meal, and not just the existence of a family meal, but the quality of it, right? The warmth and affectionateness of that family meal, because that has to be in place too, right? If kids are not looking forward to sit down because there's going to be constantly a lot of bickering and a lot of accusation and a lot of fighting and so forth. And I say this with great gravity because I know this is a big cross for a lot of us. And so this is not to shame anyone, but just to recognize, okay, if this is the reality, then let's look at that. Let's seek some help. Let's seek some healing so that we can untangle some of those knots. But if the kids are growing up in that environment, they're likely not going to be looking forward to Sunday Mass. That's kind of the hypothesis we're putting together. And the flip side is true. If the family cohesiveness, the family rituals, the daily family rituals are in place and they're healthy, they're warm, they're effective, then that's going to lead into, not always, not perfectly, but that's likely going to lead into the kids looking forward to going to Sunday Mass. And then Lindsay broadened this out more to point out how it's not just Sunday Mass, the 1 hour and then we're done. It's really the Sunday day. Yeah. It's really the whole day of rest, of leisure, of recreation. And I'll stop you here with this one anecdote from Jake, where he said that, Jake actually gets to go home for lunch every day of the week. So he has lunch and dinner most days of the week. But so he has lunch and dinner with his family. But it's usually pretty rushed. Lunch, he's got to get back to work. Dinner, they got to get going with putting the chores and putting kids to bed and so forth. But not Sunday. Sunday, they get home from Mass after the coffee hour. They get home from Mass and they have a long, leisurely lunch, and then a free afternoon, and then a long, leisurely dinner. And one of his kids, he shared with us, told him, "Dad, Sunday is my favorite day because you're just here. You're just here. You're just here with us. So Sunday is my favorite day." And that, again, a little icon, right? It's like the father is just there with the kids and the kids relating with him and just spending time together, right? Not just accomplishing a task, but spending time together. And then that being that bridge that's going to translate into the kids having the same perspective towards the Father, God the Father. Father, you're just here with us, and we love that. We want that. We long for that.
I like what you're saying as far as creating this ritual. That if you can create the ritual at home Monday through Saturday, that it is a little bit easier to get kids more engaged in Mass. And then it doesn't become, I have to go to Mass. It's, I want to go to Mass because it's part of my family's ritual. So I like that.
Right, exactly. And I don't know if I have it here right at my fingertips, but that article from the ICR by Jonah McCowan, but citing a lot of Dr. Greg Popchak, called "Raising Catholic Kids: What Successful Parents Have in Common." And he talks about this. I'm not going to find the exact quote right away, but he talks about this, about how families that have rituals together that they're doing together, including the family meal, and how the family meal can lead to providing an opportunity for the kids and the parents to develop communion with one another. I remember that was a term that has stood out for me, that it wasn't just the fact of having family meals, but actually developing communion with one another. And here it is. Family dinners basically just said family dinners are an opportunity to create communion through communication. That is where families create a space to reflect on the day together, to make plans together, to communicate values. All the research really points to the importance of strong rituals for family resilience and also in passing on values. There's a great thing about Dr. Popchak. He's a trained psychologist, and everything that he says is research based, where what I say is just anecdotally based. So don't listen to anything I say, but listen to what Dr. Popchak says. But so all these little rituals, one of the things that the Dysons do, they shared, is that a couple things. One is, there's only one conversation happening at the table at one time. So there's now 8 little kids. Their 8th one was just born. So there's 8 little kids and the 2 parents. So that's 10 people. That's a lot of people. It'd be very easy for multiple conversations to be happening. But they want that experience to be one of cohesion and for the family really to be a unit, right? It's not like 10 people living 10 different lives. It's in a sense it's that, but it's really more like 10 people living one shared life, one life of communion. And that can't be forced. There has to be some direction there, but not in the sense of like being a tyrant, right? So another phrase here from Dr. Popchak is being authoritarian, but not authoritative, right? So anyways, I'm getting sidetracked here, but so when they have these side conversations, they just say, hey, Benny was talking, let's listen to Benny. Hey, Lucy was talking, let's listen to Lucy. So that every child, whenever they're talking, they're feeling like they're seen, like they're heard, like they're known, like they matter to their parents, like they matter to their siblings. And also, they have a time oftentimes when they'll start their meals, they'll have a few minutes, I think 5 or 10 minutes, when mom and dad would just talk to each other, and the kids are asked to not say anything, to let mom and dad catch up. And the kids, and it's not always easy, they say, they have to keep reminding the kids oftentimes, but they've also shared that the kids have shared with them that can be their favorite time of the meal, of the conversation, because they just get to see how mom and dad talk to each other and relate to each other. And when they said that, I thought, I won't read it here in full, but the opening paragraph of the Catechism talks about how God created us for us to share in his blessed life. This is why we exist. We don't exist to do things for God, to obey God, to follow the commandments. I mean, we want to be doing all those things and growing in our capacity to do all those things, but that's not why we exist. We exist to share in God's own blessed life. And it's similar with parents and kids. Why do kids exist? To share in their parents' own blessed life. That's why, not to do things, not to produce, to earn their parents' approval, etc. No, they exist to share in that communion of love between mom and dad that brought them together in the first place, and out of which has grown, has generated all of these beautiful children.
So just like our, God the Father wants us to participate in this salvation mission that we have, do kids deep down, they want to participate in the family, and they want to feel like they're important and that they're contributing as well?
Right, and that's another thing that Jake talked about, how it's a key piece of our theology, of how we understand, the fancy word here is soteriology, how we're saved. How is it that God has saved us and is bringing about our salvation? He doesn't just fish us out of a pond. He actually wants us to participate in it, right, to cooperate in it, in our own salvation. And so the more that we see that, the more that the more that we see the goodness of that, the more that we yearn for it, the more that we long for it. Right? It's not just something I have to do, otherwise I'll get punished. But it's actually like, no, wow, I'm important, I'm special. My Father wants me to participate, to cooperate with him. And likewise in the chores of the home. Now again, this can't be forced with an iron fist, but it can be coached, it can be directed. And they do this, and they talk about how once the kids get into a routine, the younger kids coming up, they flow into it, right, and not automatically, they have to coach them, but yeah. So the kids want to be a part of that, because they say we matter to mom and dad. I have skin in the game. The little Dodgers talked about how they embrace this name of being a Catholic, being a Dodge. Oh, we're Dodges. We work hard, we do things, we play hard, we go on adventures, we're Dodges. And then that translated into, okay, we're Catholic, and haven't taken pride in that. And because if I don't, something's going to be lacking, something's going to be missed. This is actually one of the great points of the Sikh Conference this year, from Sister Josephine Garrett saying, you matter. If you're not here, there's going to be a piece of the body of Christ that's going to be missing. You matter. But the thing is, that's the thing about high, and I'll stop here, the high expectation and high affectivity, high affection. We can't just tell somebody that, hey, I have high expectation for you. You have to produce a lot. Otherwise, we're going to be missing something. Yeah. That's not how that's communicated to the child in a way that the child's going to receive it. Rather, it's, I know you, I see you, I prioritize you, I care about you, I put my own life down for you. Now, with this context, now I'm also going to help you see that you matter. And now the child grows up thinking, I'm loved, and I matter. And so now I say yes.
These 4 pillars, let's get started, because this sounds fascinating.
Sounds good. So these pillars of formation that these are actually drawn from the current program for priestly formation. So this is how seminarians, how priests are formed these days, or this is the structure that's used. And the four pillars are human, spiritual, intellectual, and for priests, it's pastoral. But then for families, that kind of gets translated into apostolic. And so the idea is, a human person is complex and there are many layers and it's not that simple and so forth. And so the way that John Paul II and then subsequent committees and so forth organized this was by these four layers. And the human formation is the foundation, right? So you think about priests, oftentimes, the first thing that we see of priests is we see them doing their pastoral work. We see them celebrating Mass, preaching, going to the hospital, and so forth. And we think that, seminary is just learning how to do those things, how to do those tasks, how to do those pastoral ministries, pastoral activities. And that's far from the truth because those activities can only flow from human formation, a spiritual formation, and intellectual formation. And in the seminary, they talk about how the human formation is the foundation. If there's a healthy human formation, then the other layers can be developed on top of that. But if not, that has to be healed first and has to be reintegrated first before the other formations can develop. And the thesis of this book here, Forming Families, Forming Saints, by Father Carter Griffin. So we're using this book in our project of Generational Catholicism, is that the same framework can be applied for families with some adjustments, of course, but the general principles being the same, that to raise a child, we don't start with the ministry layer or what they call the apostolic formation, right? Let me just teach you how to go out and evangelize. Rather, the human formation has to come first. And then this book goes into 5 virtues that are really relevant for human formation, namely order, sincerity, chastity, fortitude, and magnanimity. And then from that human formation, then one can layer, or on top of that, one can layer the spiritual formation, and there are subchapters there, and then the intellectual, and then the apostolic will flow from that. And I can give some examples from our conversations with the big Dodges and the little Dodges, but I think this is something that is really important. That when raising kids, at least that's what we're finding in these families, they focus almost exclusively on the human and the spiritual. Well, when little kids, just the human formation, and then as they're growing up a little more, the spiritual formation, then a little more the intellectual formation. It's only maybe, in late adolescence, and maybe there's not a hard line. It would have to dig into it more with these families, but only later on do they start talking about the apostolic formation. And that makes sense because now they're trees with firmer roots, and now they're not so susceptible to the winds of their peers and the culture and so forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Very
Yeah,
much.
because I was picturing, as you were describing this, as sort of a really big wedding cake. And if that bottom base isn't level and firm and solid, ready to support the weight of everything else, then you're not going to have a very good-looking wedding cake.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And so the Big Dodges, the most recent episode that just went up just last week, we talked about this, so we had the Big Dodges and the Little Dodges on, and that was fun. That was the first time we had just those two pairs together. And so the Big Dodges, so Ken Dodge Sr. is the dad of 5 kids, and one of them is Kenny Dodge, and now Kenny is raising his kids. And so the 2 of them are in this project, and their wives. And they talked about, so Ken and Teresa reflecting on what they did when they were raising their kids, and then Kenny reflecting on what that was like for him, receiving that. And then Kenny and Catherine started dating, courting when they were adolescents. And so in a sense, they both kind of got co-parented a little bit by both of their parents. So Catherine even is able to, reflect on what it was like to receive a little bit of that parenting from the Big Dodges. But they talk about this a lot, about how, they really were focused on developing those natural virtues on their kids when they were young. And that meant saying yes to a lot of things, saying no to a lot of things, and being very intentional about that. One thing that we went into is how they were very proactive about finding ways to help other people. So they would spend oftentimes their Saturday morning and afternoons helping random people that they would meet through church, helping them move or do their yard work, or helping the elderly take the trash out and different things. In fact, my first memory with them was Memorial Day 2017, I think it was. 2016, my summer up in St. Thomas. And we were going to go out to Silverwood to spend Memorial Day at the park. And in the morning, we had Mass at the cemetery with Father Mariusz. And then we got in their car and we started driving to Silverwood. And then they said, oh, actually, we have to make a quick stop first. And we stopped in this random neighborhood. And Emily, one of the daughters, got out and ran in the house. And a few minutes later, she came back out. And they said that she was going in to take the trash out for this older lady that couldn't do it for herself. Oh. And they just did this all the time. And Kenny was reflecting on this, like, it was just a part of our lives. Like, it was never something that we had to be forced into. It was just one of our routines. And a little bit later, they started being intentional about giving them books to read, and good books, good Catholic books, and so developing their intellectual formation. And so when Kenny became a teenager, he discovered the Catholicism video series, and he was really being fed and nourished by that. And then he thought, well, why don't I get my friends together and we watch this together? And so then got a few friends together, and then mom and dad threw some food into that, and then some volleyball into that. And before they knew it, they had 40 or 50 teenagers in their home once a week or once a month, watching an episode of the Catholicism series, praying a rosary, having dinner together, and going out in the yard and playing basketball. And that was kind of their, organically formed youth group. And so that was the apostolic formation, right? That flowed out of the human, spiritual, and intellectual formation that they'd been cultivating at home.
That is beautiful. That is beautiful. And we found in reflecting on past episodes, you had talked about families allowing space in their schedule to do spontaneous opportunities of service. And sometimes families are like, well, I couldn't wedge in one more thing. I can't wedge in a work of mercy because my schedule is so full. And I think that's really telling. It's like, what is the schedule full of that we can't share joy and share mercy with our neighbors? Right.
Which highlights the importance of saying no to things, right? And so the Dodges, they played golf, and they had all their kids. Actually, the parents didn't, but they taught had their kids learn how to play golf, and that was a big part of the family life. All 5 of the kids played golf, and they played competitively, and they would go on tournaments and so forth. But that wasn't just because they enjoyed it. I mean, they did enjoy it, but it was because they were intentional about that human formation, development of character, development of virtue, of determination, of perseverance, of work ethic, and so forth. But it's not like their lives were dominated by sports, and that's something that it is I think a common temptation today, is to just allow sports to take over the life of the family, sports and activities in general, where parents find themselves. And I'm not, again, not shaming anyone. I can't imagine how hard it would be to not fall into this, and maybe hope you can speak into this too. But how there's so many possibilities of activities to do, and they're all good. Any one of these activities are good. But then before you know it, you're just running the kids from one activity to the next, from Monday through Sunday. And then even Sunday, having to consider, this tournament coincides with Mass, and it's, out of town, and there's not a Mass available. So now we have to choose between playing the sport, and my kid is really, has great potential. And so it's like, those are tough questions to navigate, right? But one thing we talked about is like, 99.9% of kids who play sports will not become professional athletes. 99.9, and maybe like 99.8% of them will not get a scholarship, a college scholarship. And so let's start there, let's be realistic and say, okay, sports are wonderful. I love playing sports. I love playing sports today with the kids at school and so forth. That's great. But what is the purpose of the sports in this kid's life? Is it aiding the development, the human, spiritual, intellectual, and apostolic development of the child, or is it getting in the way of those things? This is actually a principle from St. Ignatius of Loyola, his first principle and foundation. It's like man is created to, let's see, I'm going off of memory here, to love, serve, and praise God, and by this means to save his soul. So that's the end, that's the purpose of life, he says. And then he says, all other things, all other created things are created to help man in the fulfillment of this end. And then he goes on to talk about holy indifference. It's like, therefore, men should be indifferent to these things, like use them to the extent that they will aid him in attaining his end, to praise God and to save the soul, and be free to let go of it to the degree that it's getting in the way of that end. And I think these families did a really excellent job with that growing up. It's like, no, we're going to say no to everything that's getting in the way of this. This radical yes to God. This is, I think, an indispensable key. It's like a radical yes to God and a radical no to sin and to the world. And not that the world is evil, right? But the ways in which the world can get in the way of our yes to God and our growth in holiness, our growth in virtue, our growth in our relationship with God and with neighbor.
Excellent.
So powerful. Because sometimes you have to kind of be the radical Catholic to say no to things. It's like, no, we're not that worldly road. We're just not going there. And it's hard. And you have to really link arms as a family and say, we're really, really not going there. It's something screen-based or school-based or sport-based. I have a musical kid. We could spend all day running to rehearsals and concerts and blowing money on instruments. And it's like, at some point you have to say, this is affecting who we are as a family.
Yeah.
And when it does, you want to nip that in the bud before it's too late. And then you're spending years and years either regretting or backpedaling. Both are hard.
Well, you can check out the series of Generational Catholicism. It's part of the Desert Wanderers podcast at saltandlightradio.com. And Father, thank you so much for all that you've given us to chew on here during this month of June. If you could please wrap all of this up with a nice, neat bow with a prayer and a blessing.
I sure can. First, can I put in one more plug really quick?
Sure.
So please listen to Natalie Laers Desert Wanderers, as Brian just mentioned, and you can find that everywhere on YouTube and everywhere else, all podcast apps, and also their website is saltandlightradio.com/podcasts. But our segment is a monthly segment in that, and it can be difficult to find just those segments. And so we put them up just on our parish website here, which is ifcatholics.net/generational Catholicism. So if you just want to find those episodes, you can do that there.
Excellent.
Okay, and I'll read here a prayer. I'll pray a prayer here from this book. And it goes like this. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Father in heaven, your servant Athanasius defended the true divinity of your Son in the face of great opposition. Give us an unshakable commitment to the truth of our faith and a determination to live in sincerity, honesty, and integrity. May our homes be places where truth reigns, where a culture of sincerity imbues all our relationships with trust, and where each member of our families experience the blessings of living in freedom and openness with you and with each other. May our adversary, the father of lies, be thwarted in his efforts through our sincerity, which is sustained by your grace and the intercession of St. Athanasius and all the saints and angels. Through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, God forever and ever.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Desert Wanderers. If you liked it, give us a thumbs up as well as subscribe down below. We're produced by Salt and Light Radio, so you can find us on social platforms at Salt and Light Radio or Desert Wanderers Podcast. We produce episodes every week and we launch them for you on Wednesdays. So make sure to tune in for next week's episode and we'll see you then.